it's good to talk.
Ladies and gentlemen, your host for the evening, BT's National Manager Wales, Geraint Jones.
Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bonedigion, Bonedigesau, noswaith dda. A gai ar ran BT estyn croeso cynnes I chi gyd yma heno I wobrau was Cymraeg sydd wedi ei noddi gan BT. Welcome to the BT Welsh Press Awards 1995. Those of you who have attended previous Press Awards ceremonies will be disappointed to hear that this year there is no sponsor speech. So all I have to do is to say for those of you who may be attending this event for the first time, this is the fourth year that we've been associated with what we believe is the most prestigious and possibly only event of its kind in Wales. As a major national and international player in the communications business, we at BT are proud to play a part in providing the framework for tonight's awards ceremony, which recognizes and pays public tribute to excellence in a variety of journalistic fields. Now, we've much to get through this evening, and to navigate us through what I'm sure will be an exciting evening, it's important to have a professional hand at the tiller. And it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you our compere for this evening, the former Managing Director of HTV, now Managing Director of Opus Television, one of Wales' leading independent production companies. Ladies and gentlemen, Emyr Daniel.
Diolch yn fawr, Geraint. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Peter Sellers was once asked to address the RTS Awards evening. Now that's a very glittering occasion. Literally glittering. The ladies all bejeweled from head to toe, the men in tuxedos and bow ties of varying hue. And he got to his feet and he said, "When I said to my mother that I wanted to go into show business, she said to me that show business was full of pros and cons. Looking at you tonight, I know what she meant." Now the tuxedos tonight anyway are fairly uniform. Yes, we're at another award ceremony. And for some of us, there's another one again on Sunday, when BAFTA have their awards evening. Well, their awards day, actually, because they started mid-afternoon. Now, it is very easy, and it's very common amongst people who attend award ceremonies, to be sniffy about them. But I'd ask you, those of you who have been candidates shortlisted for awards, those of you who are tonight, how much do you want to win? And how terrified are you of losing? So there must be something in it, and it isn't just the money. Some would say that Wales is too small a pool, doesn't justify, can't sustain an award ceremony, let alone several. Well, I'm pleased to tell you that this initiative by BT in Wales was the first initiative of its kind by BT. However, it's spreading, and BT in the Midlands and in the home counties are already sponsoring similar events. And there's talk of other regions of England taking up the same idea, sponsored by BT. Well, if those regions of England can sustain it, surely Wales can. There's also talk, I understand, of a UK BT Press Awards. Now, all this is talk, and no more than talk at the moment, because nothing about the future is certain, not even in the privatized utilities. My first task here tonight is to introduce our guest speaker, whom you've already met briefly. May I tell you, Mr. Hamilton, that we're all of us here tonight, hacks mostly, very grateful, if somewhat surprised, that you accepted this invitation by BT to spend a whole evening in the company of a crowd of journalists. The press haven't always been kind to Mr. Hamilton over the last year or two, and prior to that, he had occasion to take BBC journalists to court and managed to get money out of the BBC, something independent producers in Wales have been trying to do for years. I dare say that you relish the opportunity to get your own back. I dare say you're now champing at the bit. I don't want to anticipate what it is you're going to say, but if I don't anticipate it, I won't have an opportunity later to respond to it. So, I'm not saying that you're going to accuse us of journalists of bias, but politicians sometimes do. And I like to remind politicians on those occasions when they do accuse journalists of bias of a visit by Harold Macmillan to the BBC in 1963. He'd been invited there by the Director General, Hugh Carlton Green, and the BBC was very nervous this time. It wasn't a time of very good relations between government and broadcasters, particularly the BBC, because some of us are easily old enough to remember a splendid program called That Was the Week That Was that went out at that time. It was still going on when Macmillan visited the BBC. It stopped soon afterwards. But anyway, all the staff of the BBC were told to be on their best behavior, to wear their best suits, but they did in those days anyway. And after the tour of the building, there were gin and tonics available in the boardroom. And the DG turned to Mr. Macmillan and said, "Well, tell me, Prime Minister, what do you think of the BBC now?" "Well, I think the BBC is a splendid institution," said Macmillan. Sighs of relief all round. "But the trouble is," he said, "it's so terribly biased." Gasps. And the DG spluttered, What do you mean, Prime Minister? What do you mean biased? Biased in which direction?" "Oh, in all directions," she said. Of course, it is true that in Macmillan's day, politicians didn't have as hard a time of it as they do now. I also remember another Macmillan story which illustrates how much television journalism has changed since those days. It must have been the mid to late 50s. And Macmillan was away signing the Polaris Agreement. And interviews in those days were agreed in advance, and questions were agreed in advance. And somebody from ITN, I think it might have been Geoffrey Johnson Smith, had agreed, it had been agreed that he should interview Macmillan in the VIP lounge in Heathrow on his return. Anyway, in the last couple of days of Macmillan's visit abroad, all hell had broken loose in Cyprus. But the interview was about Polaris. And when Geoffrey Johnson Smith, if indeed it was he, got to the VIP lounge, sure enough, he asked the appropriate questions about Polaris, and then he thought he'd be really bold and ask a searching question about Cyprus. He said, "Prime Minister, do you have anything to say about Cyprus?" And Macmillan looked amazed, looked down at Selwyn Lloyd, his Foreign Secretary, and said, "Selwyn, do we have anything to say about Cyprus?" "No, Prime Minister." "No, nothing to say about Cyprus." I remember too in the early 70s when I was a young, and I was young then, a young political journalist on the question of bias. I remember being in a gathering of Labour MPs. There were even more Labour MPs in Wales in those days than there are now, in the Kremlin, the Strangers Bar. And they were, I was with HTV at the time, and they were having a hell of a go at HTV. All of them. In particular, I remember a chap called Gwynoro Jones, whom some of you may remember. And he was a little tired at the time. And then, after a while, the Labour MP for Meirionydd, Will Edwards, stopped him in his tracks, and he said, "Oh, for goodness sake," he said, "HTV have told as many lies about me as they have about any of us. Thank God they haven't told the truth." Unlike Will Edwards, Neil Hamilton is a Conservative MP. Well, come to think of it, not that much unlike Will Edwards, if you remember Will Edwards. He was born in Gwent. He's in fact Mostyn Neil Hamilton. Born in Gwent, and he went to Ammon Valley Grammar School. Now, I assume that his parents had moved, or perhaps you were a boarder at Ammon Valley Grammar School, were you? I shouldn't have thought there were many Tories in Ammon Valley. Nor were there many Tories in the university college that he first chose, which was Aberystwyth. Well, not until Ellis Owen arrived, anyway. In fact, I was talking to Ellis Owen, who is, Neil, the head of News and Current Affairs at HTV. I was talking to him earlier, and he said how proud he was. He was flushed as he spoke. How proud he was to have been at the same college as you. But he was even more proud. No, sorry, he was just as proud of having been to the same school as the current Home Secretary, Mr. Howard. It's a funny old world. Unlike Ellis, Mr. Hamilton went on to Cambridge to study law. He'd studied economics at Aberystwyth, and he became a lawyer. He was called to the bar. But shortly after that, as a barrister, he decided to make an honest man of himself, and he went into politics. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Neil Hamilton.
Anw gyfellion, rwyf yn falch iawn o fod yn ôl yng Nghaerdydd ar ôl amser maith, ac o fod yma I gyflwyno Gwobr Wasg BT. What do you think of it so far? Well, that was actually a message to you all from Rod Richards. Unfortunately, he didn't provide me with a translation in advance, and I just asked him for something that would get me the headlines tomorrow. And he said he knew exactly how to do it. Well, I'm delighted to be back once again in the land of my fathers, literally, and it's quite a long time since I made a speech in Wales. In fact, I think the last political speech I made was when I was a candidate here. During the miners' strike in February 1974, in the Abertillery constituency, which at that time was the safest Labour constituency in the country. And I worked very hard at it. We started off with 12% of the vote, and we ended up with 8% of the vote. But we got our own back. We closed all the pits, abolished the constituency, and divided them between Michael Foot and Neil Kinnock. Well, Emma, you're absolutely right. I was surprised to be asked to a gathering as uproarious as this. I hadn't appreciated that just like the BBC newsreaders in the old days, everybody would be wearing evening dress. But I was surprised to be asked because it's, I suppose, very much like asking the chief rabbi to go to the Royal Agricultural Show in order to judge the prize pig competition. But I do have a confession to make. I notice the camera's going on at this point. I do like the company of journalists. You know, we have a sort of symbiotic relationship, a bit like dogs and lampposts. But and again, Emma, you were quite right when you said that we have a bit of a sort of love-hate relationship, journalists and MPs. We are very prone to blame the press when things appear to be going wrong. Now, as a result of your efforts, politicians are, of course, very low in public esteem at the moment. I took the precaution before I came here this evening of ringing up my good friend Bob Worcester, who runs Maury Polls. And he sent me a copy of a poll which Maury had done recently. The one question which was asked was, who do we trust? And all the various professions are listed, and the public are asked, who do they trust the most? At the top of the list are teachers, and then doctors, only then clergymen and priests. Television newsreaders are fourth in this list. Politicians, I'm afraid, are way down. Only 14% of the public believe we tell the truth. That's the bad news. The good news is journalists are 10%, way below the standard. But I'd like to thank Peter Preston for putting me where I am this evening. Because in this poll, I see that in the last 3 months, 3% of the population now believe I'm telling the truth who didn't before, because government ministers do even worse than politicians generally. Because 14% believe that MPs tell the truth, only 11% believe that government ministers do. So I think we're making progress. But times, of course, have changed. There was a time when journalists in this country were very much looked up to. I remember that a Bishop of Carlisle, on the outbreak of war, said this, that we derive our inspiration from Almighty God, but we are grateful to the Times for strengthening our convictions. I don't know whether bishops will do that today. But we often hear that press standards have fallen, and I wonder whether this is the case. In the 1930s, as is well known, there was a conspiracy to prevent the circumstances leading up to the abdication to be printed in the newspapers. That's rather different from the way in which we treat certain elements of the royal family today. But I don't believe that there was ever a golden age as regards the reporting of public figures. In the 18th century, if you look at the caricatures and the pamphlets which were published in those days, that was a very violent age indeed. The 19th century was an age of cutthroat competition amongst the press, and all the stories of horrible murder and all the gory details were what sold the penny dreadfuls in those days. In the 20th century, I don't think things have changed a great deal. Winston Churchill, once lamenting the days of his youth, said that in those days we had a real political democracy in this country, led by a hierarchy of statesmen and not a fluid mass distracted by newspapers. Well, I think that those rose-tinted spectacles always give us a distorted perspective upon history. In my opinion, a free press and a free society are essential to one another. They can't exist without one another. And there is always going to be a critical tension between the press and the government, and I'm very much in favour of an irreverent press. I'm not in favour of an irresponsible press, but I do think a certain degree of irreverence is absolutely essential to the liveliness of newspapers and all the broadcasting media. But the press and the media generally, whilst they do have a tremendous force to do good, nevertheless also have a terrifying power to destroy. And what I'm most concerned about in my current circumstances, of course, is accuracy in journalism. I'm somewhat astonished to find myself for the second time in 10 years having been selected to support the legal profession for 1995 by having to embark upon legal proceedings against the Guardian newspaper. 10 years ago, alas, I was obliged, as you pointed out, to sue the BBC. That, unfortunately, ended up in the resignation of the Director General and his assistant. Peter Preston, I notice, has recently been promoted to become the editor-in-chief of The Guardian. I wonder whether he's a member of the Salvation Army, because they describe death as being promoted to glory, don't they? But the difference between my situation 10 years ago and today is that this time I was world news. I had letters from all over the world saying there are only two people in Britain who are reported in the newspapers or on the TV, wherever the letters came from. That was either the Prince or the Princess of Wales and me. And I think it is no mean achievement, actually, to knock both the Prince and the Princess of Wales off the front pages of all the national newspapers in the country for 6 days in succession. And my legs are nowhere near as good as hers. But I know it's a matter of opinion, but but politicians are modest by nature, as you know. But we did have the rather unpleasant experience of being the subjects of the interest of the Rat Pack for at least a week, until I became a victim rather than a quarry. And as one of my colleagues who's previously had this experience, who is in the House of Commons, said to me, it would change my views on hunting, because you see things in a rather different perspective after 50 telephoto lenses have been shoved up your nostril. And after you've had the experience of living at home for a week but being unable to open the curtains or the shutters for fear that the telephoto lens may capture you in an unguarded moment. Fortunately, it would only have been with my wife, had it been possible to take a photograph in those circumstances. But generally speaking, I wouldn't be counted amongst those who would castigate the press in this country for institutionalized inaccuracy. And I hope that my own rather jaundiced personal experiences on 2 occasions in the last 10 years will not warp my perspective of your great profession. Now, journalists are often prone to think of themselves as wholly dispassionate, whereas they look at politicians as being flawed and corrupt. It was my good friend Mr. Peter Preston who, when Richard Gott's antecedents were revealed recently, described the revelation as slime from the archives to a barely hidden agenda. Well, that's not to say that newspapers don't have their agendas too, not least The Guardian, that is now in litigation against me, relying implicitly on the word of Mr. Mohammed Al-Fayed, whom in editorials on the 8th and 9th of March 1990, politicians have cuttings libraries too, you see, it passes for research, castigated them as liars, deceivers, and crooks, institutionally selling cock and bull stories to the public. But that is, of course, a problem which I will have to surmount in due course. But what I think is most to be recognized about the British political system compared with those within which we are in competition is how little government is affected by the sleaze which is so often reported from elsewhere. After all, if you look at Italy, former Prime Minister Craxi is presently holed up in Tunisia because if he went back to Italy, he would join the rest of his cabinet in clink. In France also, half the cabinet is currently under investigation for various frauds. In Spain, the governor of the Bank of Spain was recently called to account before the Parliament to explain his own finances rather than those of the country, with which they had seemed to become somewhat intermingled. So I think we do have to keep these questions very much in perspective. And fortunately, journalism is wholly immune from these characteristics because, as we know, cash for questions, although it's, I think, a matter for argument as to whether that could be possible in the House of Commons, cash for editorials could never take place. But as we know, in the immortal words of Mr. Humbert Wolff, you cannot bribe or twist, thank God, the British journalist, but when you see what he will do unbribed, there's really no occasion to. But I do believe that the press does have to consider some aspects of its behaviour, and I know that this is something which is recognised even by those who derive a living from it, that there is a significant degree of distaste at some of the practices which have recently achieved some prominence, the degree of intrusion which occurs in the lives of private individuals who've had no previous contact with the media apart from being viewers or listeners or readers. And the kind of displays that we've had, which, if you're a politician, I suppose you must regard as one of the inherent risks of your profession, I don't think can be regarded in the same light when you're an ordinary private individual trying to go about your private life, whether the circumstances in which you find yourself result from your husband having been murdered in Northern Ireland, and hence you discover that you are suddenly, I'm surprised to find some people find that an amusing reference, rather a hideous comment, I think, upon those who have emerged from the dark in that way. But I do think that these are serious issues which very much ought to be kept to the forefront of argument in order that the position of the press in the esteem of the public itself is bolstered rather than diminished. Now, an element of humbug is essential in order for any advanced society to survive. And therefore, we're all guilty of it to a greater or a lesser extent. And I read an excellent article by Patrick Hannon, whom I see with his halo, hence I can see him, on the table in front of me this evening, not so long ago, in a journalistic review, where he said that although journalists often pose in the things that they write as disinterested analysts of constitutional questions or others, in fact, when they report the intimate details, whether they be sexual or otherwise, of prominent people, are in fact simply indulging in prurient gossip. Not that there's anything wrong in that. I'm as much in favour of entertainment as anybody else. What I'm very much opposed to is translating that into some form of higher principle or sanctimony, and hence individuals who are responsible for writing or publishing such pieces claiming that they have some higher purpose in mind other than to boost their circulations, make money for their proprietors, and to advance their own careers, which, as we know, are the only things really worth living for. Now, public figures, of course, forfeit to a great extent the right to a private life, and I think we must be adult about these things. But again, I think we must have some limits to that also. Sometimes I think public opprobrium may well operate to limit these rather deleterious tendencies in the press. We know that when The Sun published some rather insulting stories about people of Liverpool following the Hillsborough disaster, the circulation of The Sun in Liverpool plummeted never to revive. And indeed, my own mother-in-law, whose name is Megan, was a lifelong Guardian reader and Liberal voter who has now switched to the Daily Telegraph. And she must be the only person in the country who takes both the Daily Telegraph and the Observer. But, of course, although there are problems with the media which have given rise to extensive public debate and may well result in institutional changes in order to control the worst excesses, nevertheless, I come here this evening in good humour and with the purpose of saluting those who are going to be announced as the winner of awards this evening, because, of course, you do have a tremendous power to communicate. And politicians now recognise this. The best way of keeping a secret in this country is actually to make a speech in the House of Commons. If you really want to communicate with the people, you have to secure either a slot on TV or a slot in a newspaper. And it's a long time, I think, since the House of Commons had the kind of power which it did have in the 19th century and in the golden days. When Alun Gwyn Jones, Lord Chalfont, was made a minister in Harold Wilson's government in 1964, he was a columnist on the Times. And when he went to announce to Sir William Hayley, who was at that time the editor of the Times, that he was going to leave that great institution in order to go into government, Hayley said to him, well, when you leave this place, you will miss two things. First of all, your freedom of action, and secondly, your influence over government. Now, that, I'm afraid, has too much truth in it to be a joke. But nevertheless, I am here this evening to salute your profession, to thank you for your hospitality, and to say that this is a profession which will survive, which will prosper by the talent which is exemplified by those who will be awarded these prizes this evening. So I'm most grateful to you for inviting me, because I know that my profession is rather different. We are despised by the public at large, unfortunately, and not only for our stupidity. That, of course, has been a feature of politics for a very long time. Before the war, there was a man called Will Stone, who was a Labour MP, and had the title of the stupidest member of the House of Commons at that time. And in the 1935 general election, at one of his election meetings, a Conservative heckler in the back of the room got up and said to him, well, Mr. Stone, don't you think you've got a bit of a cheek to stand here before us, orating and prattling, when it's well known that you are the stupidest member of the House of Commons? To which he said, well, there's an awful lot of bloody idiots in this country, and they need somebody to represent them. So I think that we have a lot in common with that story, and I'm delighted to have been here. Thank you very much.
Mr. Hamilton, thank you very much for that speech, which was delivered to an audience, the vast majority of which was receptive and courteous. Alas, not all. But take comfort. You mentioned your candidature in Abertillery. I have an uncle in Abertillery, and I spoke to him over the weekend, and I said that I was introducing you tonight. And he said, yes, I remember him. He said, do you know, there are a lot in Abertillery who wish he was still the Tory candidate in Abertillery. Now, I took that, and I'm sure you will, as an indication of their fondness for you. Well, now we move on to the awards themselves. The reason for the evening, and appropriately therefore, the climax to the evening. So let's welcome back to the stage to present the awards our host for the evening, Geraint Jones. We begin with the BT Award for the Welsh Editorial Designer of the Year. The process of putting together a newspaper has latterly been transformed by new technology. But while the cliché about computers is rubbish in, rubbish out, the converse is also true. Quality in, quality out. A modern newspaper still requires a keen designer's eye to capture and retain the reader's interest. The judges decided that this year's winner of the BT Editorial Designer of the Year Award comes from Wales' only Sunday national, Wales on Sunday. Neil Lodge.
Newcomers to Cardiff University can thank Neil Lodge for the comprehensive Freshers' Guide published in Wales on Sunday, a project the paper's art editor rates his most ambitious to date. Neil has been with the paper for 4 years, during which his brief has been to enhance its overall presentation through the use of pictures, graphics, artwork and page design.
Warm congratulations to Neil Lodge, who in addition to the award receives a cheque for £350, and also, as is BT's custom, an equivalent amount goes to Neil's chosen charity, Multiple Sclerosis. Our first award for writing journalists is for the Welsh Feature Writer of the Year. Because Wales is so much more than a region, and because we have 2 languages, the journalism available to Welsh readers is more diverse, and sometimes, though certainly not always, of a higher quality than most other parts of the United Kingdom. Mae'r enillydd yn y gystadleuaeth hon eleni yn wyneb cyfarwydd yn y noson wybrwyo hon. A fe oedd enillydd y prif wobr newyddiadurwr y flwyddyn ym 1993 ac yn deilwng felly. This year's winner is no stranger to this ceremony. In 1993, he walked away with the Principal Award, Journalist of the Year. He's a man whose talents and journalistic standards would earn him an excellent living anywhere, but who has chosen to work principally in Welsh. He's the founder and managing director of Golwg Limited, Dylan Iorwerth.
Dylan Iorwerth and the newspapers and broadcasts which carry his output have been honoured frequently at these BT occasions. Trained in Wrexham, he occupied responsible posts with BBC Wales before turning freelance, and is still a widely read columnist. His initiatives include the founding of Silin, a Welsh-language Sunday newspaper, and the popular weekly news publication Golwg.
Dylan's chosen charity, to which BT will donate a sum equivalent to Dylan's own prize of £350, is the Welsh Nursery School Movement, Mudiad Ysgolion Meithrin Cymru.
Mewn stafell fawr foel mae'r byrddain llawn pobl wrth i garcharorion gwrdd a'u teuluoedd a'i ffrindiau. Dros fwrdd plaen di-drymins, mae Sean Aubrey Roberts yn ryfeddol o ddi-gyffro, bron yn anaturiol o ddi-emosiwn ynglyn â'i dynged. Mae'n llawer tyneuach na'r crymffas sgwâr a gafodd ei weld ar deledu 2 flynedd a 3 chwarter yn ôl yn cael ei fartio gan blismyn i wynebu'r ynadon am y tro cyntaf i gyd. Yr wythnos hon roedd am redeg hanner marathon tu mewn I waliau'r carchar ac mae'n edrych yn hynod o ffit. Mae'n hyn wybod i'n hollol glir, meddai wedyn. Maen nhw'n sôn am fynd yn achos at y llys Ewropeaidd, ond mi wnaeth y Llywodraeth unrhyw beth I rwystro hynny, dwi jyst yn cario ymlaen.
The judges also wish to commend two other candidates. Freelance Nerys Lloyd Pearce for three very different submissions published in Wales on Sunday and the Western Mail. Nerys, alas, can't be here tonight. And Emma Gardner, whose articles on dyslexia and transsexuals in Wales on Sunday were described by the judges as very clear and most informative. And now to sports reporting. For Welsh sport, 1994 was not exactly a year of two halves, but it was a mixed bag. Few of us were over the mood. Indeed, some of us were as sick as a parrot. In football, Alun Evans survived, and Swansea City in 1994 had a Wembley success in the Autoglass Trophy. The national rugby team also brought us some cheer by winning, somewhat unexpectedly, the Five Nations Championship. Glamorgan Cricket, alas, was back in the doldrums after their thrilling success in the Sunday League the previous year. But Cardiff featherweight boxer Steve Robinson proved that he's the best in the world. Not yet the best in the world, no doubt that'll come later, but the BT Welsh Sports Reporter of the Year, for what the judges described as his colourful style, is Bob Humphries of BBC Wales.
Bob Humphries spent 5 years as a Western Mail feature writer before moving to BBC Wales, where he worked in radio and on Week In, Week Out, before his 1989 appointment as sports correspondent for Wales Today. Frequent honours have come his way, including a Royal Television Society Current Affairs Award in 1984. In his leisure time, he remains involved with the BBC's Sunday morning soccer side.
Bob's selected charity is People vs Handicap, better known as PUSH. They will receive £350, as does Bob himself.
It was a bit of a wait, but it was worth it. The Welsh flag against the Canadian sky, the strains of the national anthem, and what's this? Not one Welshman on the podium, but two. Suddenly, Wales's other hurdler was a star in his own right. Paul Gray was up there alongside Colin Jackson, bronze around neck, probably musing, hey, this isn't bad for a couple of old mates from Cardiff's Llanedin High School. And apart from the odd gallon of 4-star, for Paul Gray, suddenly there was the realisation of a new world. The cameras and microphones weren't just for the world record holder, they were for the man who'd come out of his shadow with a vengeance.
He's sort of the Prince of Wales, so hopefully I can be up there pushing him as hard as Tony pushes him, so I'll just keep training and try hard next year.
This then was Welsh hurdling's greatest moment.
The judges also wish to commend in this category. The judges also wish to commend in this category Robert Phillips of the South Wales Echo for his efforts throughout the year in making the convoluted affairs of Cardiff City seem comprehensible and even occasionally interesting. Is he here? In television, sports reporters, news reporters, current affairs reporters, all of them need fast reactions from the man or woman in charge of the pictures. With three major broadcast outlets to serve, it isn't surprising that we have some of the best in the business here in Wales. Among them, and this year's deserving winner of the BT Welsh Television Cameraman of the Year, for his work on the BBC Current Affairs series Week In, Week Out, which the judges said showed flair and initiative, is John Cavasciuti.
Brought up in Abertillery and trained by the BBC in London, John Cavasciuti has been an outside broadcast cameraman for 30 years. He's covered top tennis and cricket, and since his return to Wales, international rugby. In 1993, he won a BAFTA award for work on the drama William Jones, and now specialises in current affairs output with the flagship programme Week In, Week Out.
Congratulations to John, and £350, a matching sum also going to his favourite charity.
Bright lights and dancing on a Friday night, but the fun is fueled by drink, and new evidence we can release shows the dangerously high price people pay. Tonight, Week In, Week Out cameras follow a quiet Friday night in Wales, revealing the full disturbing picture of injury and violence.
Leave it!
The night shift begins, and within minutes the police get their first call. It's just gone 9:30. The police are called to a confused but typical situation. A fight has just flared up. They are dazed and injured by an unprovoked attack. But then, more violence.
Leave it!
Sure. Morning, mate.
After a couple of minutes, it takes 3 officers to restrain the man who hadn't been involved in the original assault.
Let him go, guys.
The victim is left to staunch the flow of blood from his wounds. In a volatile situation, a number of people are in the area now, and the police need to defuse things quickly.
On this evening last year, the winner of the BT Principal Award, the Journalist of the Year Award, was Geoffrey Morgan, and he was a stills photographer, proving that a powerful still photograph can have just as much impact as moving pictures. This year again, the judges for the Welsh Press Photographer of the Year had several outstanding portfolios to choose from. And the judging, I'm told, took longer than in any other category. In the end, for what the judges described as a wide-ranging selection with humour, beauty and depth, the BT Welsh Press Photographer of the Year is the Dragon News and Picture Agency's Philip Rees.
Philip Rees's photographs have featured in every national daily paper in Britain, in magazines published here and abroad, and on all the UK's television channels. His employers, the Dragon News and Picture Agency, put his success down to huge enthusiasm and eagerness to tackle a broad range of projects. He was raised and educated in Swansea, where he still lives.
Congratulations to Philip Rees on snapping up that award, along with £350. Philip Rees's £350 is, of course, matched by the same amount donated by BT to his chosen charity, the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. In this category, the judges also wish to commend the work of Stephen Shakeshaft of the Daily Post. The winner of the BT Welsh Radio Reporter of the Year emerged from one of the most highly competitive categories of them all, with the BBC's considerable output in both languages competing against several independent stations. The judges had a great deal to choose from. In the end, for concise and consistent, high-quality reporting, their decision went in favour of BBC Wales radio reporter Steve Jones.
The Pembrokeshire sex abuse case, the Porthcawl Fairground tragedy, Eddie Browning's release from prison, the Dutch plane crash. These were big news stories reported in 1994 by BBC Wales's Steve Jones. All this after grooming on a Caerphilly Weekly, Celtic Press, the Rumney Valley Express and the South Wales Echo, and experience as presenter on a variety of media documentaries.
Steve's money prize of £350 is matched by a donation of the same amount from BT to Dr. Bernardo's.
Ranieri's in trouble, and there's the final whistle, and Romania go to the World Cup final.
Just seconds after the final whistle blew to end Wales's World Cup dream, the Rocket streaked across the pitch into the packed north stand where Mr. Hill was sitting with his son. It struck him on the neck and he died instantly, as Peter Curtis, who was standing nearby, witnessed.
It went in a loop across the field and it was coming straight for us where we sat in the north stand, and it crashed into a spectator 3 rows in front of us.
FIFA itself has expressed shock and regret over Mr. Hill's death. Fans letting off flares and fireworks have become a regular sight at soccer games throughout Europe, but FIFA is trying to get them banned from all grounds.
Many of us here tonight will recall the 1992 BT Welsh Press Awards at Cardiff Castle. That year, the BT Welsh Radio Reporter of the Year winner was a delightful, vivacious and highly competent trainee BBC reporter called Rhian Evans. Tragically, soon after winning this prestigious award, Rhian died in a road accident. BT promptly decided that an appropriate tribute to her would be to rename in her memory the BT Young Welsh Journalist of the Year Award. It is now the Rhian Evans Award. We are delighted that her parents, Alun and Mair, are here with us again tonight. The winner this year is, in the words of the judges, an all-round performer who combines the skills of a presenter with the cutting edge of an investigative reporter. The material is always thoroughly well researched and written and shows a rare ability to be at home both in radio and television. The judges had no hesitation in naming as the BT Young Welsh Journalist of the Year the winner of the Rhian Evans Award, the BBC's Rachel Garside.
After Ysgol Glantaf, Cardiff, and Reading University, Rachel Garside became a T. Glyn Davis Scholar at Cardiff's Centre for Journalism Studies. This proved a springboard for her move to research work on Radio Cymru News and with Wales Today, before the award of a contract last year as a Wales Today journalist. She likes travel and plans to visit Japan shortly.
£350 to Rachel, and the same amount donated by BT to the National Eczema Society.
A teenage band from West Wales is making a big impact on the London music scene. Gorgie's Zygotic Monkey have certainly got London's music critics talking, but the band, who sing in Welsh, are still modest about their success. Rachel Garside joined them at a concert in London's Camden Town.
It may not be the Albert Hall, but the Laurel Tree, Camden, is one of London's trendiest venues. And for Gorgie's Zygotic Monkey, it's a long way from their native Dyfed. They formed at Ysgol Bro Myrddin Carmarthen 3 years ago and have been called both the worst group in the world and the best band to have ever come out of Wales.
I think they're a group that probably could only have come from West Wales. They certainly wouldn't have got a band like that coming out of London, insofar as people in London tend to be very hung up on sounding right and being fashionable and so on. And I think this music is genuinely instinctive music that just comes from people's thinking rather than what they feel they ought to be doing, and that's the beauty of it, really.
So, with Gorgie's Zygotic Monkey, a name chosen at random from a dictionary, the history of Welsh pop takes a new turn, with an act and a name designed to be remembered.
Besides our winner, the judges also wish to commend Pilar Canas of Wales News Service for her contribution to campaigning journalism in the field of human interest stories. One of the most difficult jobs in journalism is making the complex world of business and finance intelligible to an audience or readership whose daily intake doesn't usually include the Financial Times. This year's winner, according to the judges, breathed visual life into complicated business news and showed an ability to accurately inform the man in the street. The split infinitive is the judges, not mine. This year's BT Business Reporter of the Year is HTV Wales Tonight's Nick Partridge.
Farmer's son, Nick Partridge, entered journalism with the Hereford Times covering the marches, before moving to report the Welsh Valleys for the South Wales Echo. Since then, in a long career with HTV, he's won many journalistic honours, including awards at the New York Film and TV Festival. In recent years, he's presented business and financial news, notably his series Money Talks.
Nick's chosen charity also benefits to the tune of £350 from BT.
These surgeons' gloves being tested in a factory near Llanelli are quite simply a cut above the rest. In fact, if they are cut or punctured in any way, a unique warning device, invented in Wales, immediately alerts the wearer to the risk of infection. Surgeons preparing for an operation put on a pair of special green gloves first and then a normal pair of surgical gloves on top. If the gloves are cut during use, they change colour. The invention is being hailed as a revolution in the battle against cross-infection between doctors and patients, especially in view of diseases like AIDS. The evening paper and a pint of milk. That's now a familiar scene on the Sandfields estate at Port Talbot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Because the early morning clink of milk bottles has been replaced by the afternoon rustle of milk and groceries. About 700 homes on the estate agreed to act as a trial area for an afternoon milk round. The milkmen involved are also happy that sales of non-milk products have more than doubled, as they now actually get to see their customers. And of course, they're enjoying not having to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Back now in the world of print journalism, we come to the BT Award for the Welsh Weekly Newspaper Reporter of the Year. Yn ôl y beirniad, fe ddyfarnwyd y wobr eleni am erthyglau difyr, hawdd i'w darllen, ond sylweddol ar yr un pryd, ac wedi gosod yn y papur mewn modd deniadol i'r darllenwr. For entertaining but substantial articles, this year's award for the Welsh Weekly Newspaper Reporter of the Year goes to Ian Parry of y Cymro.
A former quality controller of automotive parts, Ian Parry entered journalism aged 30 with the Carnarvon Herald Group and quickly built a track record. A sub-editor, reporter and columnist in 2 languages, he moved for a spell to the BBC at Cardiff before returning to Pen y Groes in Dyffryn Nanllte, from where he contributes to y Cymro.
£300 o bunnau i Ian Parry, a'r un faint i'w ddewis elusen. £350 to Ian Parry, and an equivalent amount to Ian's favourite charity, Survival International. Good name for a freelance.
Sefydlwyd y gynghrair yn erbyn campau creulon mwyn ceiso atal unrhyw gamp sy'n achosi poen i fod arall. Mae hi'n gwario miloedd ar ymgyrch gyhoeddusrwydd i ddweud y gwir am lwynogod ar y thema Beauty and the Beast. Ond bod llawer o'i hegnioedd yn mynd ar y frwydr i ata hela llwynogod, maen nhw'n pwysleisio nad ydyn nhw'n cytuno ar saboteurs sy'n bodlon defnyddio trais i atal helfeidd. Bellach mae'r gynghrair efo'r bwriad o fod yn mwy gweithgar yng Nghymru. Mae hi braidd yn wan arno ni yng Nghymru, meddai John Bryant. Mae gofyn i ni wneud mwy yno, ac mi rydyn ni'n bwriadu gwneud.
Commended in this category is Nia Griffith of the North Wales Weekly News for her work on the Conway trawler Katie disaster. And also commended by the judges is Sue Goddard of the Cambrian News. The word exclusive is often loosely, often disgracefully invoked in journalism. But the winner of the BT Welsh Daily Newspaper Reporter of the Year produced the genuine article, with a well-researched and documented piece about the Welsh Health Promotion Authority. I beg your pardon, Sue. The BT Welsh Daily Newspaper Reporter of the Year produced a genuinely exclusive article with a well-researched and documented piece about the Welsh Health Promotion Authority. For this excellent work, the winner of this award is a member of the South Wales Argus team in Newport. Ladies and gentlemen, Lucy Turner.
Somerset-born Lucy Turner studied at Cardiff Institute of Higher Education before cutting her teeth with the Pontypool Free Press. January 1994 brought a move to the South Wales Argus, where she's the Newport edition manager with a team of 4 reporters. She looks back with pride on her exclusive stories last year about an expensive scam at Health Promotion Wales.
Lucy Turner receives the award and £350, as does her chosen charity, Socialex, which is an animal charity in Gwent.
An £80,000 a year executive who cheated a Welsh health body out of £3,000 may have pocketed far more taxpayers' money in a foreign trip's fiddle. Chief Executive Professor John Catford has already resigned after government financial watchdogs were called in to investigate his travel claims. The £3,000 relates to expenses for 4 overseas trips and some dubious personal payments for work. But we can now reveal that there are at least 26 other trips which are being questioned in a report written by the District Audit Service.
Highly commended in this category too was Neil Jones of the Western Mail, Neil's long-running descriptions of some of the bizarre going-ons at the Welsh Development Agency was much praised by the judges. Every year, one of the awards most keenly looked out for is that of Television Reporter of the Year. 1 or 2 previous recipients of this award are now well-known faces on network television. And this year, too, there were several strong candidates. The winner of the 1995 BT Welsh Television Reporter of the Year is from the BBC. For his splendid work on the current affairs programme Week In, Week Out, Phil Parry.
Phil Parry is a past winner of BT's Reporter of the Year award, whose career began with the South Wales Echo. His reputation for rigorous investigative journalism continued to be forged with BBC TV's Public Eye and Newsnight programmes, and with Week In, Week Out in Wales, whose full-time presenter he became in 1994.
£350 to Phil Parry, and the same amount as a donation from BT to the charity of Phil's choice.
Tonight on Week In, Week Out, we reveal the latest evidence of excesses by the Welsh Development Agency. After months of investigation, we can show you how they secretly supported one company against another, how they squandered taxpayers' money, and how they broke the rules to get bigger and better headlines. A derelict, anonymous piece of wasteland in Aberdare. Yet it holds the key to a story of secret deals, wasted money, and hundreds of lost jobs. The cause of an astonishing violation by the Welsh Development Agency of their own codes of conduct. The WDA deny anything improper or unlawful took place. Yet we have seen sensitive WDA documents dated before the collapse of National Welsh that state how the agency is willing to purchase the National Welsh land freehold, leaving the man in overall charge of the scheme in a very difficult position. We have evidence that you went to a company, offered a demo, and said to them, buy this piece of land and we promise that we will buy it off you for £440,000.
We were in the market for purchasing land. We would be interested in talking to anyone who had an interest in that site and who was interested in selling. That's simply what we did. And we spoke with the vendors and we agreed a price which was...
but they weren't the vendors at this stage. They hadn't even bought the land at this stage.
Then we weren't dealing with those people at that stage.
And you were. We've spoken to parties involved, and that is directly opposed to what you as an agency are meant to do. Revelations in this programme are bound to have strong political effects far beyond these areas. While many affected by WDA land deals remain shocked at what they will do for ventures that make the headlines. In Cardiff, the pubs and clubs are heaving and the drinking is serious. Behaviour has changed totally now, and the amount drunk is a matter of pride. For these young men from Taff's Well, it's been a good night out and harmless fun, while others waiting to be shown the way home practice their cabaret skills.
There is much to complain about in Welsh journalism, but there's also much of which to be proud also. I genuinely believe that the quality of our investigative journalism is something that we can rejoice in and should be protective of. Alas, this is now more true of broadcasting than of print. But 'twasn't ever thus, and perhaps the various newspaper groups should give some thought to this. Over the last dozen years, we have seen splendidly healthy competition in this area between HTV and BBC, and in Welsh between the current affairs programmes that the two of them provide for S4C. This year's BT Welsh Investigative Reporter is a reporter possessing all the resilience, some would say barefaced cheek, that a good investigative reporter needs. For a portfolio of programmes from the HTV Wales This Week stable, he is Chris Seeger.
For 8 years, Prestatyn-born Chris Seeger has been a leading member of HTV's Wales This Week investigative team, and now ranks among the Principality's most seasoned reporters. Starting at the Rill Journal, he was then with newspapers in the Midlands and north of England and the Western Mail. A spell with Radio Wales followed, and also at Radio Clwyd, where he developed his presentation skills.
Needless to say, as well as £350 to Chris himself, a good start to his new freelance career, BT will be donating the same amount to Chris's chosen charity. What is the charity?
It wasn't just the looks that earned the Gwent brothers, Leighton and Lindsay Frayne, the tabloid title of the Welsh craze. They had real connections with East London's gangland. That helped put them behind the wire in a maximum security jail on account of armed robbery. But tonight, we can reveal evidence that another man actually did the job.
The Fraynes in court. When Stephen
Paul Edwards from Abertillery was a key witness in the prosecution case against the Frayne brothers. He told of carrying a gun on their orders on trips to London. Now his fellow robber says Edwards, and not the Fraynes,